Welcome to the QCA Compliance Committee sponsored webinar series. I'm Dee Fenton, Executive Director for Compliance. Today, I'm very pleased to have Nathan Cotter from HIT joining me for a discussion about marijuana and the promotional products industry. Nathan manages compliance at HIT and is the newest member of the Compliance Committee. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. You may submit those through the toolbar on the right side of the page. And to preempt the question, yes, slides from today's webinar will be made available following the presentation. Nathan, I'm delighted you could join me. Thanks for making time today.
Absolutely. I'm glad to jump on and chat with everybody today.
Okay. Well, we're going to start with the presentation, then move into a discussion. So your questions, of course, are encouraged, and we'll start off with a disclaimer. Maybe there. Okay. Under the United States Controlled Substance Act, marijuana is a Schedule I drug. QCA does not advocate the use or promotion of substances regulated and restricted under the auspices of the Act. Discussion in the following presentation is not intended to be taken as legal guidance. QCA members, applicants, and DAC members and other friends are encouraged to engage local counsel in the jurisdictions where your product is to be distributed to clarify specific regulations for your product and business. Okay. When first preparing for this presentation, 31 states, as well as the District of Columbia, Guam, and Puerto Rico, had legalized medical marijuana, while 9 states and DC had approved adult use marijuana laws that are more commonly referred to as recreational marijuana laws. Following elections last week, medical marijuana is now legalized in 2 additional states, bringing that total to 33, and adult use has expanded to Michigan to bring that number to 10. The map on your screen, which is maintained by the National Conference of State Legislatures, denotes medical marijuana states in Kelly green and adult use in olive. Business analytics and the marijuana industry, what we know. Well, the next 4 years in the legal cannabis industry are projected to eclipse current value of the promotional products industry in the U.S. Last year, the global market for legal cannabis, including medical and adult use, grew by 37% to $9.7 billion. Marijuana Business Daily projects 2018 U.S. sales to have grown by 50% over 2017 to $13 billion. That growth rate in the U.S. is expected to continue and accelerate to sales of $23.4 billion by 2022, primarily through growth in the medical marijuana sector. Excuse me. For Canada, Statistics Canada estimates pre-legalization sales in 2017 of Canadian $5.6 billion. Legal cannabis sales are projected to reach $6.5 billion by 2020, and that's Canadian dollars. Okay. Of particular interest and I think relevance to the promotional products industry are metrics associated with ancillary products and services. Estimates for the marijuana industry's economic impact are based on retail marijuana sales. The multiplier is estimated to be 3.5. And to translate this, for every $1 spent at a dispensary, another $2.50 in economic benefit is created in demand for services ranging from legal advice to lab work to banking and even the purchase of promotional products. So what is the Controlled Substance Act? The prohibition of marijuana is rooted in the Controlled Substance Act, CSA, of 1970, based on 4 criteria. At the federal level, marijuana remains classified as a Schedule I substance. According to the CSA, Schedule I substances have no current accepted medical use in the U.S., a lack of accepted safety for use under medical supervision, and a high potential for abuse. So how does this pertain to promotional products? The CSA broadly defines paraphernalia in the Act and bans advertising related to scheduled drugs. Both topics we'll be discussing later in the webinar. Some webinar attendees may be thinking about now, hey, I saw a pipe or papers or something in the case at a local smoke shop. There's a unique carve-out in the CSA for tobacco and paraphernalia traditionally used for tobacco products. Water pipes, cigar clippers, and cigarettes, sorry about that, rollers are legal unless they are expressly designated for use with marijuana products. The example here would be Tommy Chong's 2003 arrest for selling various products advertised as expressly intended to be used to consume marijuana. So presently we're at a state where there's a conflict of laws. Laws on the federal level are different than laws in the state. The dilemma caused when a state has laws differing from those of the federal regulator is nothing new to the promotional products industry, though. Regulations around a product category such as children's items can vary from federal jurisdiction to state jurisdictions and sometimes even local jurisdictions. And that's essentially the case now with marijuana. So regarding the conflict of laws, a little bit of background here. The fact that marijuana possession and use remain illegal under federal law continues to affect markets for adult use and medical use, regardless of marijuana's legal status in a state. In the 2005 case, Gonzalez versus Reich, the U.S. Supreme Court held that Congress's power under the Commerce Clause of the Constitution prohibits purely interstate activities related to marijuana, even when a state approves it for medical purposes. Given the ban on marijuana as illegal under federal law, businesses providing indirect services should also be aware that engaging in transactions with a marijuana-related business may violate the federal anti-money laundering statutes. At this point, I need to remind attendees, QCA does not provide legal advice. Attendees are encouraged to obtain legal advice appropriate to your business and the jurisdictions in which you are conducting business. Returning to the program, in October 2009, the approach defined under Gonzalez versus Reich began to be softened with the Obama administration's memo to federal prosecutors encouraging them not to prosecute people who distribute marijuana for medical purposes in accordance with state law. The Cole memo of 2013 provided formal guidance to federal prosecutors, and it states while marijuana remained illegal federally, the U.S. Department of Justice expected states with legalized medical marijuana, as distinguished from recreational, to create strong state-based enforcement efforts, deferring the Department of Justice right to challenge those the legalization laws at that time. Excuse me. The criteria for strong enforcement efforts set forth in the memo are noted on the slide. The department did, however, reserve the right to challenge the states at any time they felt a state's efforts failed these criteria. Subsequently, the Department of Justice collaborated with the Department of Treasury to issue guidance on the Bank Secrecy Act memo, which stated that the federal agencies or agents would not interfere with marijuana businesses in states where they are legal under the conditions defined in the Cole memo. So again, it references these criteria. The Treasury Department guidance clarifies, however, how financial institutions can provide services to marijuana-related businesses as long as they ensure that the business is operating in accordance with all state laws. On January 4th of this year, former Attorney General Sessions issued the Marijuana Enforcement Memorandum that rescinded the Cole Memorandum. And it allows federal prosecutors to decide, the new memo allows prosecutors to decide how to prioritize enforcement of federal marijuana laws. Specifically, the Sessions memo directs U.S. attorneys to weigh all relevant considerations, including federal law enforcement priorities set by the Attorney General, the seriousness of the crime, the deterrent effect of criminal prosecution, and the cumulative impact of particular crimes on the community. Currently, there are a number of initiatives to revise marijuana's status under consideration by Congress, including states. That is the Senate bill strengthening the 10th Amendment through entrusting states, which was introduced in June. Essentially, it codifies the Cole memo as law. That's what they're proposing. The actions in the House, though, are nothing new in the efforts on behalf of the states to curb federal intervention related to the enforcement of the CSA. When the Department of Justice continued to actively pursue arrests at dispensaries in states with medical marijuana prior to the Cole memo, Congress attached the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment to the appropriations. It was just after the Cole memo. The Rohrabacher Amendment to the Appropriations Act of 2014, effectively limiting the DOJ's ability to allocate funds to enforcing the Controlled Substance Act in states that had legalized medical marijuana. Again, there's a distinction between medical and adult use marijuana. The amendment requires reauthorization annually, and as you can see, it has been done so. So, can I mail my customer's marijuana promo item? Short answer, no. Interstate transportation of marijuana is prohibited under the CSA, and this includes transportation among states that have legalized marijuana, such as Washington and Oregon. By extension, as we noted earlier, the Act also covers paraphernalia. Section 843 of the CSA prohibits using communications facilities to transmit advertisements for the sale of Schedule I drugs such as marijuana, and further, under subsection C, prohibits advertising associated with the promotion of sale or distribution of a Schedule I drug. From the previous slide, we know that the DOJ was prohibited from enforcing the CSA through the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment. But what about the Post Office, the IRS, and the Patent and Trademark Office? First, let's look at the Post Office. Can I mail my customer's promo item? An issue of a local Oregon newspaper containing an ad for a local dispensary was first rejected, then confiscated by the local post office. On receiving written objections from the Oregon Congressional Delegation, the Inspector General responded, pointing the delegation to the Post Office's Publication 52 and its enforcement authority for CSA under that publication. To quote the Inspector General's response to the delegation, if an advertisement solicits the mailing of controlled substances such as marijuana, it would violate USPS mailing standards. Marijuana is classified as a Schedule I controlled substance. CSA 843C does make it unlawful to place an ad in any publication with the purpose of seeking or offering illegally to receive, buy, or distribute a Schedule I controlled substance. If an advertisement advocates the purchase of clinical marijuana through a medical marijuana dispensary, it does not comply with CSA 843C, subsection 843C. In sum, you can mail it, but the U.S. Post Office will not guarantee receipt, particularly if they know the contents. So, can I ship my customers marijuana promo items with our third-party carrier? FedEx and UPS are coordinating with Customs, the Post Office, and the Department of Justice on an enforcement program related to illegal importation of fentanyl and other opioids. Of course, promo items are not drugs. If shipping across state lines, products may run afoul of destination prohibitions against advertising and/or paraphernalia, which we will be discussing in a moment. There are, however, no published corporate policies or guidance documents available from shippers at this time. What would your shipping service do if a box broke open with Tommy Chong logoed spice grinders or Ziplocs? It's unclear. So this is the notification that was sent to the newspaper publisher. This is an example of how the federal administration is effectively able to continue regulating despite the direction of the Department of Justice to stand down. The Marshall letter requires the post office to accept a mail package, but it also requires the local post office to turn over suspicious packages to the Inspector General. Okay, so what guidance is out there regarding restrictions on advertising? Where states have determined advertising is permissible for medical marijuana, they have defaulted to standards established with the tobacco industry, specifically those found in the Tobacco Master Settlement Agreement of 1998. States with additional requirements typically restrict the marketing claims. With the slides from today's webinar, I will include a link to a state-by-state guide to cannabis advertising regulations. Okay, the last topic we will discuss on today's webinar are other key challenges to working with legal cannabis clients. Due to the nature of the business that marijuana remains a Schedule I narcotic and therefore conduct of business is federally illegal, standard deductions for business-related expenses are not available for businesses pertaining to the promotion or distribution of marijuana. Businesses can legally deduct only the cost of goods sold and cannot legally deduct significant business expenses such as employee wages, rent, health insurance premiums, utility, and advertising. For similar reasons, IP protections for trademarks have not been available. Under the U.S. trademark laws, federal trademark registration can be granted only in connection with goods and services lawfully regulated by commerce. There is a recent, it's kind of a question right now. There's a business called MedMen, and their logo is a stylized marijuana leaf, which did receive some IP protection. There's also local trademark protection that would be on the state level. The current, MedMen has also applied to trademark the word marijuana on t-shirts. that has not been granted to date. Okay. So again, disclaimer here, QCA does not provide legal advice. Attendees are encouraged to obtain legal advice appropriate to your business and the jurisdictions in which you are conducting business. I have listed some resources here for you, specific to the information that's contained in the webinar today. And I would point out that much of the information that is reflected here came from the American Bar Association section of Science and Technology Law. William Baker was very helpful. And on that note, with that, Nathan and I have a couple of questions to discuss. Nathan? And please feel free to submit your questions as well. Nathan?
I'm here.
Hi. So with the wildfire pace at which legalization is spreading across the U.S., has your company developed a policy on how to address the tremendous market potential while sidestepping the potholes?
Yeah, I can share that it's definitely been a topic of conversation internally here, really over the last year. And I know that's kind of when I started asking questions and we really started discussing this topic, within the compliance committee as well. We do have guidelines that we've set. Those guidelines include some domestically as well as, what we're comfortable or willing to do in regards to import orders that may come in already decorated. We've kind of separated those two things in some way.
So you're separating the import orders, the guidelines separate import orders versus domestic orders?
Yes, correct. And that's very honestly due to some experience that we've had, specifically as we were starting to dive into this space and review what products we were comfortable with and what we were not comfortable with. One of the products, and you mentioned it during the webinar that we were reviewing, were those that are called grinders. Mm-hmm. And specifically in that case, we had a factory make a mistake of placing onto one of the import documents that device was specifically a marijuana grinder instead of just a grinder. And in that case, I can tell you that product was immediately seized by Customs and Border Patrol. And I think that definitely gave us pause to be cautious of what we're bringing through the border. Certainly product that would already be branded or marked with a very specific cannabis dispensary or grower, or whatever the case may be, branding would seem to increase that risk. So that's a direction we've decided not to go at this time.
Mm-hmm. So you are decorating, any decoration would be domestic?
Correct.
Okay. Have you talked about shipping decorated products across state borders?
We have. I think that's probably where the disclaimer you gave probably needs to kick in a little bit. I think I would encourage anyone listening to have that conversation with their legal team, and that is certainly an area where we've engaged both actually several different counsel to kind of get some guidance from them on what they're seeing, what the risk is, things like that when producing and shipping those kind of products. I think that kind of jumps into a question that I had in return for you, Dee, as far as are we seeing any trends or anything approaching where potentially the the Schedule 1 nature of cannabis could change and where some of this information could be modified coming soon.
Yeah, you saw the, I think it was maybe the fourth slide, there was the introduction, the commercial introduction of a children's seizure medication, November 2nd. And that, you know, when we look back at the criteria, is there a medical use for the drugs? Schedule 1 criteria, that now satisfies one of the criteria for classifying a drug as a Schedule 1. So it's no longer no medical, it's no longer no accepted medical use. You now have a prescription value to marijuana. So
Gotcha.
that would suggest that they would likely begin looking at rescheduling it. And by the way, let me explain what the difference between the different schedules are. The Schedule 1 drugs are considered to have no currently accepted medical use, and they're high potential for abuse. Examples would include heroin, LSD, ecstasy, quaaludes, peyote. Schedule 2 drugs, and yes, marijuana presently. Schedule 2 drugs are similarly highly addictive drugs with high potential for abuse. These drugs are considered dangerous, but they may be prescribed by a physician, which is exactly what we're talking about here with the new use of that particular medication for seizures. Some examples of Schedule 2 drugs include Vicodin, cocaine, methamphetamine, oxycodone, and fentanyl. Schedule 3 drugs, and that has been proposed as the rescheduling classification for marijuana, are drugs that have a moderate to low potential for physical and psychological dependence. There is some potential for abuse, though, and examples of drugs in this category are Tylenol with codeine, ketamine, anabolic steroids, and testosterone. Schedule 5 drugs, or Schedule 4 drugs, are drugs that are typically prescribed for anxiety or sleep aids. And Schedule 5 drugs are generally used for as antidiarrheals, analgesic purposes, or perhaps cough medicine. Did that address your question?
It does, yes.
Yeah. So what has been proposed in previous legislation was to reclassify marijuana as a Schedule 3. The current bill in the Senate has a companion bill in the House, and that bill simply codifies the Cole memos as law. So essentially, as long as the state has a rigorous system in place and ensures those 8 criteria are being met, the federal DEA will not pursue, and the Department of Justice will not pursue prosecution.
Right, and I think that kind of leads into one thing that we had considered, and perhaps you can speak to a little bit as well. When considering these products, it seems like, and maybe you can answer this, is there a designation between producing items that are branded for, say, a dispensary versus those that may be produced for an industry organization or an activist group that may be pursuing regulatory change or something along those lines, but is not necessarily a t-shirt that's promoting the use of marijuana?
Well, you're right. There is a distinction between the two. The law is advertising the promotion of distribution and use. So, if we're talking about maybe an industry group such as Normal or maybe NCIS, I think it might be NCIA, any of those groups who are advocating on behalf of the rescheduling of the drug, they would be exempt from that because they're not selling. They don't. Their product is not marijuana.
How about the difference also between medical cannabis and that intended for what we called recreational use earlier?
Okay, so medical is prescribed. There is a specific ailment that is being treated with the marijuana versus recreational, which is much like alcohol or something like that. It's a non-prescribed use. It's an off-prescription use. It's considered a lifestyle. A lifestyle use. So that would be the reason for not promoting it. And this goes back to the tobacco settlement. One of the criteria is that it can't be advertised, depicted as a lifestyle. You think of the disappearance of the Marlboro Man.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the distinction between medical marijuana, advertising for medical marijuana, and advertising for adult use.
Right. I think for us in the supplier world, some of it kind of comes down to also mitigating the risk, because there are certainly distributor partners that are starting to operate in this space and starting to want to work with those companies. And I think the hard part for us is one, regulating them or working the maze of all of the different regulations within the varying states. And sometimes as we prepared, you and I spoke even within cities, there can be certain regulations and things like that. So I think one of the biggest questions for us is, at the end of the day, do we know what the DOJ's feeling is here as far as, are they really seeking to prosecute people like this? Are they really going up the chain and looking at decorators, like what we would be?
Well, and I think that's what we see from the Cole memos and, in fact, the Sessions memo. There's the prioritization, specifically related to the point about weighing relevant considerations, including federal law enforcement priorities, the seriousness of the crime, the deterrent effect of criminal prosecution, and then the cumulative impact of particular crimes on the community. Again, I'm not an attorney. I can't give you advice. I'm not offering advice, but it would suggest that it would be a low priority.
Good.
Did that make sense?
Absolutely. I think this is all really good information. Part of our process for any product safety type issues is we have constant communication with our marketing team on, things, what's going on social media, and this is just general product safety. But I think this information is going to be important for people to have, because I'm aware of an exchange via social media with a supplier and the distributor being very upset that a supplier declined to include some very specific cannabis branding on a product that they sold, and led to what appeared to be a pretty tense interaction, I would say. So I think this is going to be very good information for people to have and be prepared when they get questions about that. Should they fall on either side of this discussion? Should they elect to go ahead and do this, or should they decline to do it? But having that information.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those transactions that you want to make sure you've completed a risk assessment for your organization to determine if it's something you want to engage in. We have a couple of questions. Maybe we can take. Well, let's start with. The first question is: it sounds like suppliers are going to have difficulty selling across state lines. Selling decorated products across state lines. Is our best option to sell blank product and let the distributor coordinate decorating it in the state that they would be used? That's a really good question. And if we go back to the discussion about can I mail my promotional product, the state law, even because the post office is a federal agency, and maintains status as an enforcement agency. Obviously, you don't want to cross state lines, mailing a product that's decorated. Even if the Senate bill passes and passes the House as well, all it does is codify the Cole memos. It doesn't change the status. It doesn't change the scheduling of marijuana. That still has to be done separately. So it's still an illegal drug on the federal level. Again, I'm not an attorney, but it would suggest that it's probably better to do something like that, decorate closer to the locality in the state as opposed to outside of the state. And that's just, if you were looking at the lowest risk way of addressing something like this, decorating an order. What do you think, Nathan?
Yeah, I think that's a tough question, to be honest.
Yeah,
that's where I would certainly go back and engage with your legal team or counsel or things like that, and get their feel for, if you do ship decorated, what's the risk? What are the carriers even looking for this? I think you and I discussed a little bit when we've discussed some of this now over several months. Some of the carriers seem to have almost a don't ask, don't tell kind of policy. I think a lot of us are probably aware of this in regards to lithium-ion batteries. That at times the carriers have said, you need to tell us what's in there, and they ship it accordingly. So I think it's an interesting dynamic, I guess, is the easiest way to say it, of how to sort that all out.
Mm-hmm.
I think one question I had too, Dee,
Yeah.
and this was certainly something, a learning thing for me, and maybe we can dive into a little bit more, is that definition of paraphernalia. I think, honestly, when I started looking into this, some months ago, if you would have asked me what's the definition of paraphernalia,
Mm-hmm.
I would have, just off the top of my head, without citing a regulation, would have essentially said it's something to manipulate a drug product. So in my mind at that time, it would have been something more like very specific to the grinder, or
Mm-hmm.
things like that that you're actually putting a drug in and in some way manipulating that product and enable you to then consume that product eventually.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as you and I went through this, I think that definition is significantly broader than what I would have said early on. And I don't know if you want to speak about that a little bit, or.
Yeah, I think the clarification comes from the post office, the case related to the post office, where the law actually has a section on communications and advertising, and because advertising is called out specifically, the definition of paraphernalia is much broader than specifically manipulation. It includes anything that's used to store, anything that's used to carry, anything that's used that facilitates the purchase of. It's everything from distribution to manipulation, as you pointed out, but then also how you might store it, whether or not a hat that says Joe's dispensary. It's promoting you going to that dispensary to purchase the product. You're not going to go to a dispensary except to purchase. Well, you might go on a field trip, that sort of thing. What is this thing? But the next time you go, you're probably not going on a field trip. You're probably going to purchase something. And the image is what, the logo is what conveyed where you should go. So that is essentially promoting the consumption. That's how it's been interpreted. When you think about the advertisement, why did they confiscate it? Why did they confiscate the issue of the newspaper? The reason they confiscated the issue of the newspaper is that there was an advertisement in the newspaper promoting a dispensary, a local dispensary. So based on that advertisement, they determined that they were trying to encourage people to go to that dispensary to purchase marijuana, which would then be consumed. Being a Schedule I drug at that time, there's no medical use, et cetera, federally recognized medical use, and therefore it's illegal to promote the business. It's an illegal activity, and therefore it's illegal to promote it. There we go. Did that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the key words when we looked at that definition was also concealing. A number of the products that I'm aware of, that I've seen proposed, that I've seen shown within the industry, would definitely trend, I would say, toward that line of concealing. Be it containers with secondary seals, you know, for smell control and things along those lines. So I think that's an interesting part to at least take a look at for sure.
Yeah. Let's see. Other questions? Nathan, do you have any other questions that you want to?
I do not have any additional questions right now.
Okay. Well, the slides for this webinar will be made available following the webinar. And